The paperwork is final, Ben. You have until 6 p.m. to vacate. That gives you a generous 90 minutes. My grandson, Josh, didn't even look at me. He spoke to the clipboard in the hands of his smug young lawyer. The hot, sticky air of the late summer afternoon felt like a physical weight on my chest, pinning me in my own front doorway. The lawyer tapped the final page. Your signature acknowledged the terms of default. It's all perfectly legal. Josh finally looked up, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. He let out a short, sharp laugh. Don't look so surprised, Grandpa. You had your chance to keep up. This is just business. He adjusted the collar of his crisp shirt, a stark white against the wilting heat. The finality in his voice was a slammed door, the sound echoing the end of my life in this house. My home. He had taken everything, and now he was sweeping out the dust. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable from across the street, was frozen mid-stride on her lawn, her watering can dangling from her hand. Her face was a mask of horrified pity. The lawyer, noticing her stare, angled the clipboard so the bold, black print of the eviction notice was plainly visible. It felt like a public shaming, a document held up for the whole world to see how completely I had been outmaneuvered, how thoroughly I had failed to protect myself, to protect Clara's memory. But as their eyes bored into me, waiting for me to crumble, to beg, something else took hold. I let my shoulders relax. I folded my hands calmly in front of me, a habit from my long years as a librarian. I looked past Josh's triumphant face, through the doorway, to the mantelpiece in the living room. I said nothing. The silence stretched, thin and tight, and their smirks began to falter. They expected tears. I offered them only stillness. My gaze settled on the small, delicate shapes arranged on the mantel, the source of my calm. Josh shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. Well, are you deaf, old man? He snapped, his confidence fraying. I met his eyes, letting a small, quiet smile touch my own lips. He saw it and recoiled, a flicker of genuine confusion, of fear, in his eyes. He was about to learn a very hard lesson. But months earlier, it all began with the sound of a doorbell on a Tuesday morning. The house had been quiet for a year. The kind of profound silence that follows a great noise. The noise in this case being my wife Clara's laughter. Her room, overlooking the garden she adored, remained a sanctuary. Her books were on the nightstand, a pair of reading glasses resting on a closed page. I'd go in there sometimes, just to stand by the window and feel the sun on the floorboards, imagining she was just in the other room. It was my memorial. Josh had moved in 6 months ago. To help you out, Grandpa, he'd said. Make sure you're eating, taking your meds. He was my only grandson. At first, his presence was a welcome distraction from the quiet. He brought the chaotic energy of youth into the still air of my home. He was always on his phone, pacing, talking in a rapid-fire language of finance and ventures that I, a retired librarian, couldn't begin to parse. I was just glad for the company. One afternoon, he found me in Clara's room. You know, he said, leaning against the doorframe, this is prime real estate. Great view. Ensuite. I turned from the window confused. It's your grandmother's room, Josh. He waved a dismissive hand. I know. But it's an empty room. I'm creating income. It's smart. He saw my expression tighten and sighed. The martyr. I'm trying to help you, Grandpa. This house costs money to maintain. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the simple wooden shelf above the dresser. It held Clara's collection of delicate porcelain birds. Tiny hand-painted wrens, finches, and bluebirds, each one a gift I'd given her on our anniversary. We should sell this junk, Josh said, picking up a tiny robin. He tossed it lightly in his palm. Probably get $50 for the lot on some collector's site. Every little bit helps. The carelessness with which he handled it sent a chill through me. Put it down, Joshua, I said. My voice was low, but it held an edge that made him stop. He placed the bird back on the shelf with a clatter. Fine, he shrugged. Just trying to be practical. Sentimentality doesn't pay the property tax. He didn't understand. Those birds weren't junk. They were a testament. 47 years of anniversaries of quiet love sitting right there on that shelf. To him, they were just $50. To me, they were everything. The trigger event happened a week later. The doorbell rang at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. I opened it to find a young couple, backpacks on, squinting at a phone. "Hi," the man said cheerfully. "We're the Millers. We booked the Clara's Garden View room for 3 nights." The listing said check-in was flexible. I stood there dumbfounded. The words made no sense. I'm sorry," I stammered. "I think you have the wrong house." The woman showed me the phone. There it was. A picture of Clara's room. My blood ran cold. The photo was professional, sun-drenched. The caption read, "Charming sunlit room in quiet heritage home. A perfect writer's retreat." My wife's memorial, her sanctuary, was listed for rent. Just then, Josh appeared behind me, beaming. "The Millers. Right on time. Welcome." He pushed past me, grabbing their bags. "Don't mind my grandpa," he said with a laugh. "He gets a little confused." He shot me a look that was pure steel. A look that said, "Play along." I was paralyzed with a humiliation so profound, it felt like a physical blow. He ushered them upstairs into Clara's room, their heavy footsteps echoing on the polished wood floors. My home was no longer my own. It was a guest house. I was the confused old groundskeeper. The scent of lavender, which I always associated with Clara's garden, just outside that window, suddenly felt tainted, commercialized. A marketing gimmick for strangers. Later that evening, after the Millers had gone out for dinner, I confronted him. "You rented out Clara's room." It wasn't a question. He was in the kitchen, scrolling on his laptop, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen. "I told you I was creating income," he said, not looking up. "It's pulling in $400 a night. We're booked solid for 2 months. You should be thanking me." This place was a money pit. His justification was so cold, so transactional, it left me breathless. "That room is not a line item on a spreadsheet, Josh. It was your grandmother's," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. He finally looked at me, his eyes devoid of warmth. "She's gone, Grandpa. Life moves on. We have to be practical. I'm building a future here." He then pushed a document across the table. "This just gives me official management rights, a formality for the bank and the booking sites. Sign it." It was a residential lease agreement. It named me as the landlord and him as the tenant, with a special clause granting him sole authority to sublet and manage property rentals. It was dense with legal jargon I could barely follow. "I'm not signing this," I said, pushing it back. His face hardened. "You have to. I already have binding agreements with 24 guests. If you back out, we'll be sued. We'll lose everything. Is that what you want?" The threat hung in the air, sharp and ugly. He was trapping me. He had created a crisis and was now offering me the only solution. I thought of Clara, how she used to read stories to a young Josh in that very room, his small head resting on her lap. That memory, so pure and cherished, was now a weapon used against me. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. With a trembling hand, feeling utterly defeated, I signed the paper. The stroke of the pen felt like a final surrender. Life became a series of quiet intrusions. Strangers with rolling suitcases became a common sight. I'd retreat to my study, the sound of their unfamiliar voices seeping through the walls. I learned to recognize the sound of the key in the lockbox Josh had installed by the front door. Each click was a reminder of my lost authority, my lost home. I was a ghost in my own house, haunting the hallways while life, loud and commercial, went on without my consent. One afternoon, I overheard Josh on the phone in the garden, his voice sharp with irritation. He was complaining about a recent guest who had left a bad review. What did they expect for that price? The old man was in the hallway, looked at them funny. "Yeah, my grandfather. He's part of the ambiance." Hearing myself described as a piece of decor, a potentially problematic feature of his business, was a new, deeper level of degradation. I wasn't even a person anymore. The next day, I found the review online. It was for the Clara's Garden View room, 3 stars. The room was lovely, but the host's elderly grandfather, who lives on site, made us uncomfortable. He seemed sad and was often just staring. It was a bit creepy. My grief, my private sorrow in my own home, was now a public spectacle being rated for its effect on a stranger's vacation. The shame was a burning coal in my stomach. That review was a turning point. The humiliation hardened into something else. Resolve. Josh believed he had won, that I was a relic to be managed. He underestimated me. A lifetime spent as a librarian teaches you one thing above all else: how to find the information you need. And I knew there had to be something, some rule, some detail he had overlooked in his arrogant rush to profit. My first thought was a desperate one. I started by taking screenshots of the Airbnb listing. The smiling photos of Clara's room, the glowing descriptions he'd written, the dozens of upcoming bookings. Evidence. My plan was simple, perhaps naive. I would call the police. These were paying strangers in my home without my true consent. Surely that was trespassing. It felt like a solid legal footing, a way to reclaim control. It was my first attempt to fight back, a small spark of hope in the suffocating darkness. But my hope was quickly extinguished. The next morning I visited a legal aid clinic downtown. A tired but kind young lawyer listened patiently to my story. She looked over the lease I'd signed. Her expression was sympathetic, but her words were devastating. "I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson," she said gently. "By signing this, you gave him tenancy and the explicit right to sublet. You made a landlord-tenant agreement. He isn't trespassing, and neither are his guests. You signed your authority away." I walked home in a daze. It was a crushing defeat. The very document he had used to trap me was now his shield. My one attempt at a solution had been brutally dismantled. I felt more powerless than ever. The deadline of the next guest arriving tomorrow night loomed, a ticking clock marking another defeat. When I got home, Josh was there, counting a thick wedge of cash on the kitchen table. "Good day," he said, not bothering to look up. "The Finns paid in cash. Saves on platform fees. ... That evening, I went into Clara's room. The guests were out. The air smelled of cheap perfume and someone else's luggage. I looked at the shelf of porcelain birds, gathering a thin layer of dust. They seemed to mock me. A collection of fragile, useless things, symbols of a past I couldn't protect. I reached out and touched the small, cold body of the wren, the first one I ever gave her. It represented my profound loss, my helplessness, my failure to keep my promise to her. As I stood there, lost in despair, my fingers traced the smooth, painted surface of the bird. I remembered the day I bought it, from a small shop in a town we visited on our honeymoon. The shopkeeper had wrapped it so carefully. "For a special lady," he'd said. My gaze drifted from the shelf to the window, and across the street to Mrs. Gable's perfectly manicured lawn, her prize-winning roses blooming in neat, orderly rows. Her husband had been the head of the Homeowners Association for 30 years. An idea, faint and distant, began to form. The HOA. Our neighborhood, Oakmont Estates, was notoriously strict. Rules about everything from the color of your mailbox to the height of your hedges. When Clara and I bought this house, we were given a thick binder filled with covenants, conditions, and restrictions. A librarian's nightmare of tedious bylaws. We signed it, filed it, and promptly forgot about it. Where had I put that binder? I spent the next 2 hours tearing through my study. Dust motes danced in the lamplight as I pulled old boxes from the top of the closet. Finally, at the bottom of a chest filled with tax returns from the 1990s, I found it. A heavy 3-ring binder with Oakmont Estates HOA covenants embossed on the spine. It felt impossibly heavy, as if weighted with significance. The dry, musty smell of old paper filled the air, a scent I'd always found comforting. Tonight, it smelled like battle. I sat at my desk, the ticking clock on the wall, marking the seconds until the next guests arrived. I started on page 1, reading through the dense legalese. Rules about fences, satellite dishes, lawn maintenance. It was all there. I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I chasing a ghost? Was this just another dead end? Another false hope waiting to be crushed? Josh would laugh if he saw me. The old librarian burying his head in a book, searching for a magic spell. Then I found it. Page 17, Section 4, Use Restrictions. My heart began to pound. Clause 4.2b was titled Prohibition of Commercial Activity. It stated in no uncertain terms, no trade, business, or commercial activity of any kind shall be conducted in or from any residence, with the exception of home office use that does not involve client or customer visits. And then, the final beautiful sentence. This prohibition explicitly includes short-term rentals, inns, and guest houses. It was the aha moment. A surge of adrenaline, cold and clear, washed over me. Josh's entire enterprise was illegal. Not criminally illegal, but a direct violation of the HOA agreement we were all bound by. The agreement was a contract, senior to the lease he'd made me sign. He hadn't just betrayed me. He put the entire property at risk. The bylaws specified the consequences: steep daily fines, and ultimately, the right of the HOA to place a lien on the property. Suddenly, the lease I had signed wasn't a shield for him. It was a trap. It made him the official tenant, the one legally responsible for the property's use. He had, in his own handwriting, declared himself the manager of the illegal operation. The porcelain birds on Clara's shelf seemed to stand a little taller. They weren't symbols of my loss anymore. They were my silent porcelain witnesses. The key wasn't the birds themselves, but the memory they unlocked of the life we built here and the rules we agreed to follow. My mind raced, the librarian's instinct for order and process taking over. I needed more than just the binder. I needed irrefutable proof of the violation. I went back to my computer and, with methodical precision, began taking screenshots. The Airbnb listing, the glowing reviews, the calendar showing months of future bookings. I saved every image, every piece of digital evidence, to a folder on my desktop. I felt a cold, calculated calm I hadn't felt in months. And next morning, I made a phone call, not to the police, not to a lawyer, but to Mr. Henderson, the current president of the Oakmont Estates HOA. He was a retired accountant, a man who lived and breathes bylaws. "Ben, good to hear from you," he said, his voice brisk. "Everything all right?" "Not exactly, Robert," I said calmly. "I need to report a significant violation at my address, one that could impact property values for the entire neighborhood." I heard a pen click on his end of the line. I laid it all out, my voice even and factual. The short-term rentals, the stream of strangers, the online listing. I emailed him my folder of evidence while we were on the phone. There was a long silence as he reviewed the files. "Good heavens, Ben," he finally sputtered. "This is a flagrant violation of 4.2b. Completely unacceptable. He's running a hotel out of your house." The outrage in his voice was the validation I needed. I had an ally. "The board will issue a formal cease and desist notice immediately," Robert said, his voice all business now. "The fines will start at $500 per day, retroactive to the date of the first rental we can prove, and we will hold the registered tenant, your grandson, liable." He paused. "Ben, this also gives you grounds. The lease he had you sign is predicated on the legal use of the property. He's in breach. You can terminate it. Immediately." The words were like music. That afternoon, just as the new guests were scheduled to arrive, Josh found me in the living room. He was in a foul mood. "The Finns left a 2-star review," he grumbled, scrolling furiously on his phone. "Said the Wi-Fi was slow and complained about the creaky old house sounds. Can you believe the nerve?" He looked up at me, expecting sympathy. "We need to modernize this place. Gut it. It's the only way to get 5-star clients." It was his final, arrogant insult. He was so consumed by his greed, by his petty frustrations, that he had no idea the trap was already sprung. He saw me as a piece of creaky, outdated furniture, something to be cleared out in his grand renovation plan. He didn't see the binder on the coffee table. He didn't notice the quiet determination in my eyes. He was about to lecture me on profit margins when the doorbell rang. He smiled. The new guests," Try not to stare at them this time, okay, Grandpa? But when I opened the door, it wasn't a smiling couple with suitcases. It was Robert Henderson from the HOA, holding an envelope, and two uniformed police officers standing behind him. Josh's smile vanished. "What is this?" he demanded, his eyes darting between them and me. "Mr. Joshua Peterson?" Henderson asked, his voice ringing with authority. "You are the registered tenant of this property?" Josh nodded dumbly, a nod of confusion and fear tightening his face. Henderson handed him the envelope. "This is a cease and desist notice from the Oakmont Homeowners Association. You are in violation of Covenant 4.2b. All commercial rental activity must stop immediately." One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we're here to prevent any breach of the peace. Your grandfather has also filed a formal trespassing complaint against any non-resident individuals on this property." The color drained from Josh's face. He looked at me, his mouth agape. "Trespassing? What are you talking about?" he stammered, looking at me. "I have a lease." I finally spoke, my voice clear and steady. "You have a lease that is now void, Joshua. You breached the contract by engaging in illegal activity on the premises." I held up a second document, one I'd had a paralegal draft for me that morning. It was a formal notice of lease termination. "You have violated the terms of our agreement. This is your eviction notice." The porcelain birds, once dismissed as worthless junk, were the key. They had anchored a memory, which led to a forgotten rulebook, which became the weapon of my liberation. Josh had seen them only for their monetary value, or lack thereof. He never saw their true worth, the history they represented, the foundation of the home he was so eager to exploit. He had built his entire scheme on a foundation of sand, right under the roof of a house, governed by rock-solid rules. He tore open the HOA envelope, his hands shaking. He scanned the document, his eyes widening at the mention of the fines. $500 a day? Retroactive? That's over $30,000, he whispered, horrified. "That's correct," Henderson said crisply, "and it will continue to accrue until the property is in full compliance. A lien will be filed tomorrow morning." Josh looked utterly broken. The smug confidence stripped away, revealing the panicked, greedy child underneath. "You dig this," he hissed at me, his voice trembling with rage. "You set me up." "You did this to yourself, Joshua," I replied, my calm a stark contrast to his rising hysteria. "You saw a home, a memory, and you only saw a revenue stream. You never stopped to read the rules." The librarian in me couldn't resist the irony. He, the master of the digital age, the quick-moving entrepreneur, had been undone by his failure to read the fine print in a dusty old binder. The new guests, a young couple, arrived then, pulling their rental car into the driveway. They got out, smiling, and walked toward the chaos on the porch. "Hi, we're the Martins," the woman said, her smile faltering as she took in the scene. The officer stepped forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am, sir, there's been a mistake. This property is not a rental. You'll have to leave." The public humiliation was now Josh's, right here on my front porch. The perfect symmetry was not lost on me. The Martins looked confused, then angry, demanding explanations and refunds. Josh could only stammer, pulling out his phone, his face pale and slick with sweat in the late afternoon heat. He was trapped between the angry guests, the implacable HOA president, and the silent police officers. He was cornered, just as he had cornered me. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. I had not just reclaimed my home. I had dismantled his entire, fragile empire of deceit. He made one last, desperate appeal. "Grandpa, please, we can fix this. I'll stop. Just call them off. The fines, they'll ruin me." He was pleading now, the sneering mask of the savvy businessman gone completely. But I remembered his words. "She's gone, Grandpa. Life moves on. We have to be practical." I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I thought of Clara. This was for her, for the sanctity of the life we built in this house. I said nothing. I simply held up the lease termination notice again. "According to this, you have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from the premises," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. The officer nodded. "We can escort you inside to gather some essentials now, sir." The finality was absolute. He wasn't my grandson in that moment. He was just a tenant in breach of his contract. A problem to be removed. Josh stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He had truly believed he was untouchable, that his age and supposed cleverness made him superior. He never imagined the quiet, sad old man in the hallway had a mind that was still sharp, a memory that was still long, and a will made of iron. He had dismissed me, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. He was escorted inside, but defeated man. I stood on the porch as Robert Henderson shook my hand. Let us know if you have any more trouble, Ben. The police car idled at the curb. The Martins were on the phone, angrily trying to book a hotel. The hot, sticky air no longer felt oppressive. It felt like the calm after a storm. I looked through the open door, past the foyer, to the living room mantel. The porcelain bode stood in a neat row, catching the late afternoon sun, silent and victorious. An hour later, Josh emerged, carrying 2 duffel bags and a laptop case. He didn't look at me. He walked down the path his grandmother and I had laid with river stones 40 years ago. His shoulders slumped. At the curb he stopped and turned, his face a storm of resentment. You'll be sorry, he spat. You'll be all alone in this big, empty house, rotting with your memories and your stupid birds. The words were meant to wound. But they had lost their power. I was already alone. He had made sure of that. But now, the silence that would fill the house would be mine. It would be a peaceful silence, not the tense, violated quiet I had been living in. He got into his car, a sleek, expensive machine, likely paid for with the deposits of strangers, and peeled away from the curb with a squeal of tires. The sound faded, leaving only the gentle chirping of crickets in the evening air. The quiet was beautiful. I walked back inside and closed the front door. The click of the deadbolt was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. I went straight upstairs to Clara's room. It was tidy. Josh had insisted on a professional cleaning service, but it felt hollow, stripped of its soul. I opened the window. The scent of her roses, her lavender, drifted in on the evening breeze, untainted. It smelled like home again. My eyes fell on the shelf. I picked up the little porcelain robin he'd so carelessly tossed in his hand. It felt cool and solid in my palm. He had called them junk, but this junk had been my salvation. It was a reminder that the things that truly matter, love, memory, integrity, are often quiet and easily overlooked by those who only see the world in terms of profit and loss. He had the spreadsheets. I had the foundation. The next morning, I received a formal apology from the HOA, along with the first official fine notice that had been mailed to Josh's new address, his parents' house. I had no doubt his father, my son, would be calling soon, demanding I relent. But that was a battle for another day. For now, I was reclaiming my space. I spent the morning changing the sheets on the bed in Clara's room, replacing the generic white hotel linens with her favorite floral set. Mrs. Gable came over with a plate of cookies. I saw the commotion, she said, her eyes full of concern. Are you all right then? I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I'm better than all right, Martha. I'm cleaning house. She didn't press for details, just patted my arm. Clara would be proud of you, she said softly. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I believed it was true. That evening, the phone rang. It was my son, as I predicted. His voice was a mix of anger and bewilderment. Dad, what the hell is this? Josh is here, saying you threw him out and got him hit with a $30,000 fine. You have to call it off. He made a mistake. I listened calmly. It wasn't a mistake, Mark. It was a business plan. He turned his grandmother's room into a hotel and lied to me. He made his choice. He was trying to help you with the bills. This house is expensive, Mark argued, echoing his son's justifications. And whose fault is that? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You both stopped visiting, stopped calling, left me to manage on my own. He didn't see an old man who needed help. He saw an asset to be stripped. The conversation ends here. Before he could reply, I hung up. The silence that followed was a shield. The days that followed were peaceful. I removed the lockbox from the front door. The act itself was a small ceremony of reclamation. I walked through my house, reacquainting myself with its sounds and smells. The creak of the third step on the stairs, the way the light fell across the living room floor in the late afternoon. These were the details Josh had dismissed as creaky old house sounds, but they were the rhythm of my life, the soul of my home. I knew there would be fallout. The family was likely fractured for good. But the fracture had been there long before I served the eviction notice. It was a crack that had formed from neglect and greed, and Josh had simply shattered it completely. I felt no remorse. I had defended my home, my wife's memory, and my own dignity. I had taught my grandson a lesson that he should have learned long ago. Never underestimate the quiet ones. A week later, a small package arrived. It was from the legal aid lawyer I had first consulted. Inside was a simple card. "Mr. Peterson," it read, "I heard about what happened. Sometimes the best legal tools aren't in the law library. Well done." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. She had seen my defeat, and now she was acknowledging my victory. It was a quiet confirmation that I had done the right thing. I sat in Clara's room, the window open, the scent of the garden filling the air. The house was quiet, but it was a living quiet now, filled with the presence of memory, not the absence of life. The porcelain birds on the shelf seemed to catch the light, each one a small, bright point of resilience. They were a testament to love, but now they were also a monument to justice, a quiet, unassuming collection that held the power to restore a world turned upside down. I didn't need to sell them for $50. I didn't need to pack them away. They belonged here, in this room, a permanent part of the story of this house. They were a reminder that value is not always monetary. The most powerful assets are often hidden in plain sight, dismissed by the arrogant, and understood only by those who know their true history. Josh had learned that lesson at the cost of his inheritance. My solitude was no longer a burden, it was a choice. I was the keeper of this house, the guardian of its memories. I had faced down the intruder, not with force, but with knowledge. The librarian had won. I had found the right book, the right page, the right clause. It was a victory not of anger, but of order. The restoration of what was right and proper. Josh had brought chaos, and I had brought the cleansing power of the rules. The following Friday, at 4:30 p.m., I was sitting on my front porch. The hot, sticky air was still there, but it felt different. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the old oak tree Clara and I had planted. I thought back to that moment in the doorway, when Josh and his lawyer stood before me, so certain of their victory. They had the paperwork, the aggression, the momentum. But I had page 17. I had leveraged my grief, my history, and my attention to detail against his youthful arrogance. It wasn't a fair fight, but he had been the one to start it. He had mistaken my quiet dignity for weakness, my age for incompetence. It was the last mistake he would make at my expense. The house behind me was silent, at peace. It was my sanctuary, once more. I had faced the ultimate family betrayal and emerged not unscathed, but whole. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The colors reminded me of a sunset we had watched from this very porch on our last anniversary together. "Promise me you'll keep the garden tidy, Ben," Clara had whispered. It was a promise I intended to keep. I had pulled out the weeds, the invasive species that threatened to choke the life out of this place. The garden could breathe again. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Mrs. Gable. "Come over for dinner. I made pot roast." A Sybil invitation, a sign of the community that remained, the connections that were real and true. I texted back a simple, "On my way." The future was no longer a terrifying void, but a series of quiet moments to be lived. My life wasn't over. It was just entering a new, quieter chapter. Before I left, I went back to the living room. I looked at the mantelpiece, at the silent porcelain flock. They were more than just birds. They were sentinels. They were the physical manifestation of a promise, the anchor of a memory, and the instrument of my victory. They had watched the betrayal unfold, and they had witnessed its righteous conclusion. They were proof that in the end, the truth has weight. I locked the front door behind me. the sound firm and final. As I walked across my lawn towards my neighbor's house, a cool evening breeze rustled the leaves. The house stood behind me, quiet and strong. It was safe. I had done what I needed to do. The fight was over. I didn't look back. I just kept walking forward, into the calm and peaceful twilight.